Respect isn't given because of fear. It's earned through strength, babe, the kind he never understood.
The fluorescent lights of Roosevelt High's chemistry lab buzzed faintly, casting pale shadows over the rows of desks. It was the kind of place where students usually learned formulas and experiments. But on this particular morning, something far more unforgettable was about to unfold. At the front of the classroom stood Danielle Johnson, a woman in her early 40s with a calm, composed demeanor. Her posture was straight, her hands steady as she arranged beakers and glass tubes for the day's demonstration. To most people, she appeared to be just another science teacher. Polite, kind, maybe even a little too quiet. But what no one in that room knew was that Danielle carried a past unlike any teacher they had ever met. She had served her country. She had endured grueling nights under desert skies, navigated battlefields where a single mistake could mean the end, and had stood shoulder to shoulder with comrades who trusted her with their lives. Yet here in this suburban high school, she chose peace. She chose to nurture young minds instead of carrying weapons. To her students, she was simply Ms. Johnson. But sometimes, fate has a way of testing whether the strength we leave behind ever truly leaves us. As the chatter of restless teenagers filled the lab, Danielle noticed one boy who had always been louder than the rest. His name was Ryan Miller. Born into a wealthy family that never had to worry about bills, food, or safety, Ryan carried himself with an arrogance that filled every corner of the room. He loved to make jokes at the expense of others, and Danielle had seen his smirks whenever she turned her back. That morning, as Danielle carefully poured a chemical into a glass beaker, Ryan muttered something cruel under his breath. A few students laughed. Danielle's eyes flicked toward him, but she said nothing. She believed in teaching through patience, through guidance, not punishment. But Ryan wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, his friends circling him like loyal admirers. "She acts all smart," he sneered just loudly enough for others to hear. "But let's be real. What's a black woman like her doing teaching science anyway? Shouldn't she be cleaning the floors instead of running this class?" The words struck the room like a slap. A tense silence fell over the students. Some stared at their desks, ashamed to even look up. Others chuckled nervously, unsure how far Ryan would go. Danielle, however, did not flinch. She had faced bullets. Words were nothing. Still, she knew she had to hold the room together. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, her voice steady, "you may think that disrespect will make you stronger. But you'll find out one day that it only makes you weaker." Ryan rolled his eyes, emboldened by the quiet gasps from his peers. He stood up, towering over his classmates. And then, in an act of reckless arrogance, he walked right to the front. Before anyone could stop him, he reached out, his hand closing around Danielle's throat in mock aggression. The class erupted in horrified shouts. But what Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the hand he dared to place on her would be the very hand that sealed his humiliation. Because Danielle Johnson was not just a teacher. She was a soldier who had once faced enemies far more dangerous than a spoiled teenager. And in that moment, the quiet strength she had kept hidden all these years stirred awake. This wasn't just going to be another classroom story. This was about to become a lesson Ryan, and everyone watching, would never forget. If you want to know how Danielle transforms this terrifying moment into a story of power, justice, and inspiration, keep watching till the end. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that just might change the way you see the world. Ryan Miller had always been the kind of student teachers whispered about in the staff lounge. Not because of grades, those were average at best, but because of his attitude. He was the type who strutted down the hallways as if the entire school existed for his amusement. He wore designer sneakers worth more than some family's rent, gold chains that glimmered under the lights, and an ever-present smirk that made students either follow him or fear him. Ryan's arrogance had roots. His father was a wealthy developer in the city, and his mother, a socialite who attended charity luncheons but rarely spent time with her son, gave him almost everything he wanted, except discipline. Ryan grew up believing money excused cruelty, that if you had status you could walk over anyone, and the world would still cheer for you. At school, he wasn't just a class clown. He was a predator of insecurities. If a student stuttered while reading aloud, Ryan was the first to mimic them until tears welled in their eyes. If someone wore old sneakers, he'd make sure the whole class noticed. To him, belittling others was entertainment. But what made Ryan particularly dangerous was the way he targeted teachers. He loved testing their limits. He'd toss homework into the trash in front of them. He'd fake yawns during lessons, mumbling, "So boring," loud enough for everyone to hear. And when detention was assigned, he'd sit smugly, knowing his father would simply make a phone call to the principal, who would quietly make it all go away. With Danielle Johnson, however, Ryan had found a new kind of target. She was different from the other teachers. She never raised her voice. She never seemed rattled by his antics. And the calmness, the unshakable patience gnawed at him. Ryan thrived on reaction. Danielle gave him none. To Ryan, this wasn't just about mocking a teacher. It was about proving to everyone that no matter who stood in front of him, he held the power. He convinced himself that Danielle's quiet nature wasn't strength, but weakness. "She's just another pushover," he told his friends one afternoon. "She doesn't scare me. I'll make sure the whole school sees she's nothing." That planted the seed of his cruel performance in the lab that day. He wanted shock value, he wanted dominance, and he wanted to humiliate Danielle in front of every single witness. So when he walked up to her during class, towering with false bravado, and placed his hand on her throat, it wasn't just a reckless act, it was his declaration. "I can do whatever I want, and no one can stop me." The gasps of his classmates only fueled him further. He grinned, enjoying the fear in the room. Some students whispered, "He's going to get expelled." But Ryan knew better. He believed his father's money and influence would protect him, just like always. In Ryan's mind, this was already a victory. He had turned a quiet classroom into his stage, with Danielle as the unwilling prop. He thought he had won the power struggle. What Ryan couldn't see, blinded by his ego, was that the stage he created would soon become the very place of his downfall. Because Danielle Johnson was not a woman to be underestimated, and the cruel boy who thought he ruled the school was about to face a truth far greater than wealth, arrogance, or status. Real strength doesn't shout. It reveals itself when it matters most. When Ryan's hand closed around Danielle's throat, most of the students froze, too shocked to move. But Danielle's eyes remained steady, calm in a way that unsettled anyone who looked at her closely. She didn't gasp. She didn't flail. She simply looked at Ryan with the kind of quiet power that made his bravado look small. Because this wasn't the first time Danielle had faced aggression. In fact, compared to what she had lived through, this was barely a flicker in the storm of her past. Long before she became Ms. Johnson, Danielle had worn a very different uniform. At 20 years old, she had enlisted in the United States Army. She was the first in her family to serve, and many had doubted her at the time. "You're too gentle," some said. "You will never survive the training." But Danielle had already grown up in struggle. Raised in a working-class neighborhood where opportunity was scarce, she had seen her mother work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. She knew what it meant to fight for survival long before boot camp. And in boot camp, she didn't just survive, she excelled. Danielle pushed herself harder than anyone else, running longer, lifting heavier, memorizing every drill until it became second nature. She had a quiet fire that her drill sergeant noticed. "Johnson," he said once during a grueling march, "you've got something most soldiers don't. You don't quit." Her years in the military took her across the world, from scorching deserts to freezing nights under foreign skies. She learned discipline, strategy, and most of all, resilience. She became known in her unit not for being the loudest, but for being the one who never cracked under pressure. When others panicked, Danielle stayed calm. When situations spiraled, she found solutions. One mission in particular stayed with her. Her convoy had come under sudden attack in a remote area. Chaos erupted, but Danielle remembered every drill, every word of her training. She pulled 2 injured soldiers to safety while directing her team to regroup. They survived that day because Danielle kept her head steady when fear wanted to take over. Years later, when she hung up her uniform and chose the classroom instead of the battlefield, Danielle carried that strength with her, but she rarely spoke about it. To her, being a soldier was part of her story, not her identity. She wanted her students to know her as someone who believed in them, someone who taught them to think beyond the textbooks, someone who could show them that knowledge itself was a form of power. Still, Every now and then, small glimpses of her past would show. Students had noticed how Ms. Johnson always stood with her shoulders square, her back straight, even when she was simply writing formulas on the board. They noticed how nothing startled her. Not a sudden loud bang from a dropped beaker, not the chaos of a fire drill. Even her footsteps were deliberate, steady, like someone who had marched in cadence for years. A few teachers had once seen her in the staff gym after hours, lifting weights with surprising strength for someone her size. One whispered, "Did you know Danielle used to be in the army?" But the rumor never spread far. Danielle didn't bring it up, and most assumed she was just dedicated to fitness. The students, however, never truly knew the depth of her experience. To them, she was simply the nice teacher who never lost her cool, and Ryan mistook that calmness for weakness. What he failed to understand was that calmness was the result of battles already fought. The silence was discipline, not fear. The composure was training, not surrender. As Ryan stood there in the lab trying to assert dominance, Danielle's mind flashed, not to fear, but to control. She could feel every muscle in her body remember drills, techniques, the instinct to disarm, to defend, to neutralize threats. She didn't act yet. She didn't need to. Not until the moment demanded it. Her eyes locked with Ryan's, and though she said nothing, he felt a strange unease in the pit of his stomach. For the first time, maybe, he wondered if he had underestimated her. Around the room, students whispered nervously. Some reached for their phones, ready to capture what was unfolding. They thought they were about to see a teacher humiliated. But what they were really about to witness was something none of them could forget. The awakening of a strength no one expected. Because Danielle Johnson had spent years mastering herself in situations where failure wasn't an option. And while Ryan saw only a teacher in a lab coat, what truly stood before him was a woman who had already faced life and death, and survived. The stage was set. The past was rising to meet the present, and Danielle's moment to reveal who she truly was fast approaching. The classroom had never been so silent. The air was thick with shock as Ryan's hand remained pressed against Danielle's throat. His friends sitting in the back chuckled nervously, unsure whether to cheer him on or worry about how far he was taking things. Several students sat frozen, their mouths open, while others whispered in disbelief. Danielle did not move at first. She stood still, her eyes locked on Ryan's. Her calmness confused him. Most teachers would have panicked, shouted for help, or tried to pry his hand away. But Danielle simply breathed through her nose, steady and unflinching, like she had been here before. "See?" Ryan said with a cocky grin, glancing at his friends. "She's not going to do anything. She's too scared." A few students laughed, but the sound died quickly as Danielle slowly raised her hand and placed it firmly, but gently, on Ryan's wrist. She didn't shove or yank. She didn't struggle. Instead, she squeezed with a precise control that made Ryan's confident smirk falter. In one fluid motion, so quick that most students barely caught it, Danielle twisted her body slightly to the side and redirected Ryan's arm. He stumbled forward, completely off balance, and within seconds found himself bent awkwardly, his wrist immobilized in her grip. His hand dropped from her neck and he let out a startled yelp. The room gasped. Danielle's voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. "Respect," she said, loud enough for the class to hear, "is not optional. It is earned, and it is returned." Ryan struggled, trying to pull free, but Danielle's hold was unbreakable. She wasn't hurting him, not yet, but she held him in a position that reminded everyone watching of one thing. She was in control now. "Let me go." Ryan barked, his voice cracking with frustration. "You can't do this?" Danielle leaned down slightly, her eyes steady. "No, Ryan. What I can't do is allow you to think bullying makes you powerful. What I won't do is let you believe you can disrespect others without consequence." The entire class sat on edge, their phones half raised, capturing every second. But what was most shocking to them wasn't just the fact that their teacher had flipped Ryan with such ease. It was the composure, the precision. It was clear this wasn't luck. This was training. Ryan tried again to wrench free, but Danielle smoothly shifted her stance, guiding him down until one knee buckled. He was on the floor now, looking up at her. a reversal so complete that even his closest friends stared wide-eyed, unable to laugh. "You think strength is about being loud," Danielle continued, her voice unwavering. "You think power is about control. But real strength—" She loosened her grip slightly and allowed him to catch his breath. "Real strength is about discipline. It's about protecting, not humiliating. And that is something you will learn today." The words cut deeper than the hold on his wrist. Ryan had never been humbled like this. Not by a peer, not by an adult, and certainly not by someone he had thought was weak. His face turned red, partly from the pressure, partly from embarrassment. "Please," he muttered under his breath, hoping none of his friends would hear the desperation creeping in. Danielle released him slowly, stepping back with controlled grace. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his arrogance drained but his anger burning hotter. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice trembling between rage and humiliation. But Danielle didn't even look ruffled. She adjusted her sleeve as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened, and faced the class. "Open your textbooks," she instructed calmly. "Page 134. Today we learn about chemical reactions, the way two forces meet and transform into something new." It was almost poetic, the way her words hung in the air. The students exchanged looks, half in awe, half in disbelief, before slowly flipping their books open. No one dared laugh. No one dared interrupt, yet the tension hadn't vanished. Ryan slumped into his seat, fuming. His friends avoided his eyes, too shaken to offer support. For the first time, Ryan wasn't the center of power in the room. Danielle was, but she wasn't finished, because while the class pretended to read their books, Danielle turned her attention back to Ryan. "Mr. Miller," she said evenly, "you owe this class an experiment. I believe you wanted to demonstrate a reaction earlier." The sarcasm wasn't cruel. It was measured, and everyone in the room felt the weight of it. Ryan stammered, unsure what to say. He wanted to snap back, but his hand still ached from her controlled grip. And the image of him kneeling on the floor burned in his memory. She walked to the front of the lab station, picking up a beaker and holding it under the light. "Sometimes," she said, addressing the entire class now, "we misunderstand reactions. We think force always wins, but often the smallest adjustment, the most precise response changes everything." Every word was layered. The students understood she wasn't just teaching chemistry anymore. She was teaching them about life, about respect, about consequences. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, the silence of his classmates louder than any laughter could have been. He was trapped, not by Danielle's grip anymore, but by the realization that his power, his so-called dominance, was gone. The performance wasn't over. This was only the beginning, because Danielle's quiet revelation in front of the class wasn't just a lesson for Ryan. It was a spark, a reminder to every student watching that strength comes in forms they don't expect. And soon, the truth about who she really was, the life she had lived before ever stepping into a classroom, would be revealed. That truth would not only flip the dynamic once again, but would echo far beyond the walls of Roosevelt High. For now, though, the class sat mesmerized, caught between the chemistry experiment on page 134 and the unforgettable human experiment unfolding before their eyes. Danielle Johnson had shown them a glimpse of her power, and the performance had only just begun. The classroom buzzed with a tension that refused to fade. Though Danielle had resumed teaching as if nothing had happened, the students could hardly focus on the equations and formulas in their textbooks. Their eyes kept darting toward her, replaying in their minds the effortless way she had controlled Ryan. For the first time, Ryan himself sat quiet, his face red with humiliation. The boy who usually filled the room with laughter at others' expense now stared down at his desk, biting his lip, replaying every second of his failed show of dominance. But then, like wildfire, rumors began spreading. Students whispered, "How did she do that? Where'd she learn that move? No way, she's just a teacher." A few who had caught the moment on their phones began tapping furiously, texting friends outside the room. "You won't believe what Ms. Johnson just did." By the time the bell rang, the hallway was alive with chatter. Danielle stepped out calmly, but the eyes that followed her were no longer indifferent. They were curious, wide with the dawning realization that their teacher was far more than she appeared. It didn't take long before the whispers reached the staff lounge. "I heard Ms. Johnson pinned a student down like a professional fighter," one teacher gasped. Another frowned. "That's impossible. Danielle's one of the calmest people I know." But Principal Harris, a man who had always respected Danielle's steady character, had heard enough to call her into his office. "Danielle," he said carefully as she sat across from him, "students are saying you subdued Ryan Miller today." Danielle's expression was serene. "I prevented him from hurting me. Nothing more." The principal hesitated, leaning forward. "You handled it differently than most would. Truth be told, many here wouldn't have known what to do. You moved like someone with training." A pause lingered between them. Danielle exhaled slowly. "I don't talk about it much," she said at last. "But before I became a teacher, I served in the United States Army." The words hung heavy in the air. Principal Harris blinked. "The Army?" She nodded. 8 years. Overseas tours, combat zones. I specialized in tactical defense and survival training. I've dealt with situations most people can't imagine. What happened today, compared to what I've been through, it was nothing." The revelation spread like lightning once the principal, stunned but impressed, confirmed it quietly to a few staff members. By the end of the day, everyone knew. Ms. Johnson wasn't just a science teacher. She was a decorated veteran. For the students, the revelation hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, her composure made sense. Her posture, her unshakable calm, the reason she never flinched in chaos. She wasn't weak, she wasn't soft, she was battle-tested. Ryan, overhearing the chatter, felt his stomach twist. The boy who had mocked her heritage, her profession, her very identity, now realized he had put his hand on someone who had once defended the country he took for granted. The humiliation deepened. His friends no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with disbelief. "You messed with a soldier," their expressions seemed to say. The next morning, when Danielle walked into class, the silence was different. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. Students sat straighter. They listened more carefully. Even the ones who used to doodle or whisper gave her their attention. And Ryan, for the first time, he avoided her gaze. Danielle didn't brag. She didn't lecture about her past. She didn't need to. The truth itself was louder than any speech. She simply continued teaching, letting her actions and her resilience stand as proof of the life she had lived. The twist had shifted everything. The balance of power in the school had changed overnight. What once looked like fragility was now revealed as quiet strength. What Ryan tried to portray as weakness had been unmasked as unmatched discipline. And though Danielle hadn't set out to make an example of him, her revelation was destined to become a story students would tell for years. The day a teacher revealed she was a soldier, and a bully learned the hardest lesson of his life. Ryan Miller had never felt smaller in his life. For years, he had been the self-proclaimed king of Roosevelt High, the boy with money, with friends, with the arrogance that made him untouchable. But in just a matter of hours, the empire he thought he had built crumbled beneath him. By lunchtime, the day after the incident, the hallways buzzed with a story that spread faster than any gossip the school had ever known. The bully grabbed Ms. Johnson and she flipped him like a soldier. Students reenacted the scene, exaggerating it with wide eyes and hushed voices. Phones pinged with videos that captured the moment Danielle had effortlessly taken control. And while students laughed, the laughter wasn't at her expense anymore. It was all on Ryan. His closest friends, the ones who used to cheer him on, now avoided walking beside him. They didn't want to be associated with the boy who got dismantled in front of the entire class. His name, once spoken with fear or admiration, had become the punchline of every whispered joke. "Don't go grabbing teachers," one kid teased as he passed him in the cafeteria. "Unless you want to end up on the floor like Ryan." Ryan's pride was in tatters. The more he tried to act unaffected, the clearer it became that he was drowning in humiliation. Even teachers who had once dreaded calling him out now gave him stern, unwavering looks. He couldn't hide behind his father's money or his reputation anymore, because what everyone had seen with their own eyes couldn't be erased. But the real blow came from home. When his parents were called in, expecting another boys will be boys situation that they could smooth over with influence, they were stunned to hear the truth. Principal Harris explained the incident. And when he mentioned that Danielle Johnson was a military veteran who had shown remarkable restraint, Ryan's father's face darkened. For once, he couldn't talk his son's way out of trouble. That evening, Ryan sat in his room, replaying the memory again and again. Her calm eyes, the effortless way she had taken control, the power in her voice. For the first time in his life, he felt what so many others had felt around him, powerless, and it scared him. The downfall wasn't just about losing status. It was about realizing that the power he thought he had never truly belonged to him. It was built on fear, on cruelty, and the moment he met someone with real strength, it collapsed like sand. Ryan Miller, the arrogant bully, had been dethroned. And everyone, including himself, knew it. The story of what happened in Danielle Johnson's chemistry lab spread beyond the walls of Roosevelt High. Within days, it became the kind of tale that slipped into conversations at the grocery store, at bus stops, and even around dinner tables in the community. Students retold it with pride. Our teacher stood up to a bully and showed him what real strength looks like. Parents whispered in admiration. Teachers, long tired of Ryan's antics, finally felt a sense of justice. For Danielle, however, life remained steady. She never bragged about the incident. She didn't hold it over Ryan or use it as a platform for attention. Instead, she continued teaching with the same calm dedication she always had. Yet something had shifted, not just in her classroom, but in the hearts of everyone who walked through those doors. Her students now saw her differently. When she spoke about perseverance, they listened more closely. When she emphasized discipline and respect, they understood those words carried weight. Even the most restless kids who once rolled their eyes at lessons sat up straighter. Danielle had become more than a teacher. She had become a living example of resilience. And for the students who had quietly suffered under Ryan's cruelty, her strength was liberating. No longer did they fear being mocked or ridiculed. They saw that arrogance and prejudice could be challenged and defeated. Danielle's calm defiance gave them permission to believe in their own strength. The school administration, too, took notice. Principal Harris arranged a special assembly, not to recount the incident in detail, but to highlight values of respect, courage, and integrity. To everyone's surprise, Danielle was invited to the stage. She spoke humbly, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not here to relive what happened," she told the auditorium, "but I want you all to know something important. Strength is not about how loud you are, or how much money you have, or how many people you can push around. Strength is about self-control. It's about respect. It's about standing up not just for yourself, but for those who can't stand up on their own." The room erupted in applause, not because of the drama of her words, but because of the truth in them. Students knew she was speaking from experience, from a life that had been tested far more than they could imagine. Soon, Danielle's influence extended beyond her school. She was invited to speak at local community centers and youth programs, sharing her story of service, teaching, and quiet strength. Her message resonated deeply in neighborhoods where young people often believed power came only from dominance or rebellion. She showed them another path, one built on discipline, respect, and resilience. Ryan, meanwhile, remained quieter in the weeks that followed. Though humiliation had marked him, the shift wasn't all negative. Danielle's restraint had left him room to reflect. He wasn't expelled, a decision Danielle herself supported. "He needs guidance, not exile," she told the principal. And slowly, Ryan began to change. He spoke less cruelly. He stopped mocking his classmates. The boy who once thrived on tearing others down had learned, in the hardest way, that arrogance had limits. The change in Ryan became part of Danielle's legacy, too. Not because she broke him, but because she taught him. By the end of the year, Roosevelt High felt different. The hallways weren't ruled by fear or cruelty anymore. Respect, fragile but growing, had taken its place. And at the heart of it all was one teacher, a woman who had once worn a soldier's uniform, but now carried the even heavier responsibility of shaping young lives. Danielle Johnson hadn't just triumphed over one bully. She had sparked a cultural shift, reminding everyone that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it simply stands firm until the world learns to listen. At the end of the day, Danielle Johnson's story wasn't just about a teacher putting a bully in his place. It was about something far greater, the power of quiet strength, the resilience of character, and the reminder that dignity will always outlast arrogance. Ryan thought strength came from intimidation, wealth, and status, but Danielle showed him, and everyone watching, that real strength is measured by how you treat others, especially when you have the power to hurt them, but choose not to. She could have humiliated him further. She could have broken him down. Instead, she chose restraint, turning the moment into a lesson rather than a spectacle. Her story teaches us all that our past struggles, our hidden scars, and our silent disciplines are not weaknesses. They are our greatest sources of power. You never truly know the battles someone has fought, the resilience they've built, or the wisdom they carry. Which is why respect should never be optional. And maybe the most important lesson of all, one act of courage can spark change, not just in one person, but in an entire community. Danielle's calm defiance didn't just protect herself, it inspired transformation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. And remember, true strength isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right.